Epictetus once said, "Man is affected not by things, but by the view he takes of them." These words hold more power than they initially appear, for upon reflection, it becomes clear that it is not the world that shapes one's life, but rather the narratives one repeats to oneself day after day. The mind becomes the sum of the words cultivated in silence, far from the scrutiny of others. If one awakens proclaiming a lack of energy, the body responds with weakness. If one constantly reiterates that nothing goes right, one's vision becomes clouded, leading to stumbles at every turn. However, when one chooses to speak to oneself differently, not with illusions, but with firmness, discipline, and clarity, one's entire reality begins to reorganize. It is as if a new internal structure is forged, and life itself starts to align with this new pattern. Most individuals fail to recognize the profound influence of their internal dialogue. They spend countless hours preoccupied with what others say, yet neglect the silent conversations they have with themselves. Yet it is precisely this hidden discourse that determines one's energy levels, confidence, and even resilience in the face of adversity. One acts as the coach of one's own mind, and every uttered phrase becomes a command that the body and soul obey without question. This guide will explore powerful mental exercises and practical principles that, when embraced, can profoundly transform one's daily experience. 4 days without explaining yourself to anyone. Consider embarking on a 4-day challenge. 4 days in which one consciously chooses to eliminate one of the most insidious, invisible poisons of modern life: the constant need to justify oneself. Many people live as if perpetually on trial, offering explanations for every choice, every step, as if indebted to the entire world for their actions. A delayed response to a message prompts an immediate scramble for an excuse. Declining an invitation triggers an obligation to apologize. Making an unconventional decision leads to anxious contemplation of how others will perceive it. This relentless need to convince others of the validity of one's choices is a profound form of self-imprisonment. Now, imagine 4 days of strategic silence. 4 days where one offers no explanations, invents no excuses, and leaves no room for unnecessary judgment. If asked, "Why didn't you come yesterday?" a concise and firm response like, "Because I didn't want to," suffices. Simple, unembellished, and devoid of drama. Such a response can be startling because it directly challenges the expectation of justification. What happens when one begins to practice this? Respect grows. People recognize that one's life is not a public display to be debated by all, but a path guided by personal decision. Living without constant explanation is not arrogance. It is clarity. Excessive explanation is often a disguised plea for approval. When one feels compelled to offer 1,000 reasons, the underlying message is often, "Please understand, don't judge me, accept what I've done." But when one responds with simplicity and directness, a powerful message is conveyed: "I know what I want, and I do not require your validation." This approach does not imply treating others with disdain. Rather, it signifies treating oneself with unwavering firmness. Test this principle for 4 days. Eliminate all superfluous justifications. If one declines something, simply decline. If one accepts something, simply accept. If one changes one's mind, simply change it. Observe how the mind begins to liberate itself from an invisible prison. The burden of constant explanation is immense, yet because it is socially accepted, few recognize its weight. Each unnecessary explanation is a micro-defeat, a small concession where one elevates others to the role of judges in one's own life. True strength lies in owning one's decisions without needing to prove anything. Reflect on great leaders, masters, and historical figures. None expended energy trying to convince everyone of their rectitude. They simply moved forward. Some applauded, others criticized, but all recognized their unwavering resolve. Respect is not earned by seeking acceptance. but by commanding presence through the way one lives. This 4-day exercise will challenge the mind, as the impulse to explain often arises almost automatically, like a conditioned reflex. One might say, "I can't go," and immediately the brain searches for an excuse. "I'm tired, I have another commitment, I woke up late," all to appear acceptable. For these 4 days, the challenge is to sever this reflex. Simply state, "I won't go," and leave it at that. It may feel uncomfortable initially, perhaps even dry or rude. But this discomfort signals the withdrawal from an addiction, the addiction to external validation. After a few days, one will experience a profound lightness, not because people will applaud, but because one finally understands that the burden of approval is no longer necessary. Life begins to move at the pace of one's own conviction, not the opinions of others. Furthermore, when one ceases to explain, one gains a clearer perspective on who truly respects them. Those who demand justifications for everything likely never genuinely accepted one. But those who hear a simple response and move on are the ones who see one's true essence. This filtering process is powerful. In just 4 days, one will discern who is truly worth keeping close. Therefore, remember this: 4 days without explaining oneself to anyone. 4 days where every response is firm, concise, and clear. 4 days where one refuses to humble oneself in pursuit of acceptance. 4 days dedicated to mastering the art of being true to one's word. Upon completion, one will grasp an obvious truth that few dare to practice. One owes nothing to the world but one's integrity. And those who live with integrity need no explanations, for their very lives speak for themselves. Treat each morning as an internal battlefield. Every morning presents itself as a battlefield, not one fought with weapons or visible adversaries, but a silent struggle concealed between awakening and the day's first movement. When the alarm sounds, it is not merely the noise of a device. It is the declaration that war has begun. On one side stands the formidable force of inertia, comfort, and laziness, whispering, "Stay a little longer. You deserve it." On the other, a firm, albeit still faint voice asserts, "Rise. There are tasks to be accomplished." To treat the morning as a battlefield means acknowledging that one's initial combat is not with work, bills, or external problems. It is an internal conflict waged between oneself and one's inner self. Those who conquer this initial war begin the day with a distinct advantage. Those who succumb spend the remainder of the day extinguishing fires, perpetually playing catch-up, and constantly feeling behind schedule. Consider the great warriors of history. They never entered battle unprepared. They adhered to rituals, discipline, and relentless training. Now one must ask, how does one approach the battlefield of their mornings? With focus and determination, or already defeated by weariness? The true adversary is not fatigue itself, but the narrative one constructs around it. The weary yet disciplined warrior rises. The warrior who succumbs to the body's excuses surrenders. For 4 days, undertake the challenge of viewing each morning as an arena. Upon opening one's eyes, refuse to negotiate. The body will plead for more minutes. The mind will conjure plausible justifications. Yet it is precisely at this juncture that action is paramount. Each victory in this initial skirmish cultivates the identity of someone who fulfills obligations, even when disinclined. This is the crucible where true strength is forged. The morning battlefield extends beyond the mere act of rising early. It encompasses a myriad of small decisions. To choose coffee over unhealthy indulgences, a book over a phone, or focused energy over distractions. Each choice represents an offensive or defensive maneuver. By approaching each morning in this manner, one positions oneself as a strategist rather than a victim of circumstance. There is a stark difference between those who awaken as soldiers and those who awaken as slaves. The soldier rises with the awareness that discipline is their armor. The slave awakens, dragged by external stimuli, immediately chasing messages, news, and external pressures. This distinction, even after just 4 days of practice, begins to reshape the mind. One realizes that it is not the environment that dictates one's course, but the manner in which one steps onto the battlefield early in the day. To treat the morning as an internal battle signifies living with tension, but also with clarity. It means understanding that the first victory is over oneself, and once achieved, the day's subsequent struggles appear diminished. It is akin to a warrior who triumphs at the very entrance of the field. Morale soars, confidence grows, and momentum is established. Imagine 4 consecutive days where one resolves to rise with the first alarm, choosing not to commence the day with distractions, but with something that fortifies the spirit: reading, reflection, silence, or exercise. Envision how this transforms one's demeanor throughout the rest of the day. Every action becomes more resolute, every decision clearer. One ceases to be merely carried along and begins to lead. Here lies a subtle detail often overlooked. The morning battle is not won by physical strength, but by the power of one's internal narrative. What one tells oneself in the initial minutes sets the tone for the entire engagement. If one begins with weak phrases like "I can't," "I'm too tired," one has already entered defeated. However, if one declares something short and direct, such as "Rise, it's time to act," the mind obeys and the body follows suit. For 4 days, choose to fight. Choose to conquer oneself right from the start, and do not await motivation, for motivation is a soldier often late to the battle. What must precede it is discipline, ever ready. When one awakens, remember, the war is not against the world, but against the weaker version of oneself. If one vanquishes that version early, nothing else seems quite so threatening. By the end of these 4 days, one will not merely have woken earlier or been more productive. One will have tasted the sweetness of internal victory, a triumph independent of applause or recognition, yet one that builds an invisible foundation, the conviction that one is capable of self-command. And those who learn to command themselves, sooner or later, learn to command their own lives. For 4 days, do not complain. Not even in thought, certain habits are so deeply ingrained that they go unnoticed. And among the most destructive is complaining. This includes not only vocal complaints, but also silent internal grumbling, irritation over minor details, internal murmurs about things not going one's way. The insidious truth is that every complaint, even a mental one, acts like a drop of poison, accumulating until the entire mind becomes saturated. Now envision a challenge both simple and radical. 4 days without complaining, neither aloud nor in thought. 4 days dedicated to replacing grievances with observation. This does not imply passive acceptance of everything. Rather, it means ceasing to expend energy labeling every detail of life as unbearable, unjust, or terrible. It signifies starving the addiction to dissatisfaction. Consider this: complaining does not alter facts. It merely amplifies discomfort. If traffic is stalled, complaining will not make cars move faster. It will only escalate one's impatience. If someone is late, complaining will not hasten their arrival. It will only intensify one's irritation. Complaining never resolves. It only exacerbates. What resolves is action. And when action is not possible, acceptance resolves. Yet the conditioned mind often prefers to complain because it is the easier path. During these 4 days, one will observe how automatic the impulse to complain truly is. Dropping something on the floor elicits a grumble. An ill-timed message prompts a sigh. Even minor inconveniences, like a slow cue or a trivial error, trigger the mind to complain. This is where the training lies, intercepting this flow at its inception. Each time the urge to complain arises, silence it internally, breathe, and observe the raw fact, devoid of adjectives or judgment. This exercise will reveal a surprising truth. Reality becomes lighter when one refrains from adding complaints to it. The burden resided less in the events themselves and more in the narrative one imposed upon them. Without complaint, things remain as they are, and one discovers the ability to navigate them with less wear and tear. The problem was not the cue, it was the internal dialogue that declared, "This is a waste of time.
I hate this.
I can't stand it anymore." To refrain from complaining, even in thought, is also a test of self-mastery. Not complaining aloud is relatively easy. It merely requires holding one's tongue, but not complaining in silence demands constant vigilance. It means policing what immediately arises in the mind, recognizing the precise moment a complaint emerges, and possessing the strength not to nurture it. It is like seeing a spark and preventing it from becoming a conflagration. In 4 days, one will notice a profound transformation. Firstly, a reduction in irritation, for if one does not fuel the fire, it extinguishes. Secondly, a sense of clarity, because without the noise of complaint, space opens for contemplating genuine solutions or simply moving forward without drama. Thirdly, a strengthening of presence, because complaining is living projected into discomfort. Not complaining is living anchored in the present moment. Naturally, there will be situations demanding action. Not complaining does not equate to silently accepting injustice. It means not squandering energy on empty grievances. The distinction is clear. Acting means confronting the problem. Complaining is merely chewing on the problem. In 4 days without complaining, one will realize how often in their routine they repeatedly chew on the same discomfort without enacting any change. By breaking this cycle, energy becomes available for objective action. This exercise also exposes the trap of victimhood, for complaining is always a reminder that one casts oneself as a victim of the weather, of people, of circumstances. When one eliminates complaint, one also sheds this fragile identity. One assumes the role of protagonist. If something cannot be changed, one endures it in silence. If something can be changed, one acts to change it. But there is no room to get lost in lamentations. 4 days, just 4 days, in which one resolves not to complain, neither aloud nor in thought. It may seem a short period, but the transformation is profound. By the end of this period, one realizes they were carrying far more weight than necessary, and that life did not become easier because problems vanished, but because one ceased to feed them with useless grievances. And perhaps, after 4 days, one will not wish to return to the old ways. Respect yourself as you respect those you admire. Pause for a moment and reflect on the individuals one most admires. This could be a leader, a mentor, an athlete, an entrepreneur, a teacher, or even a family member. When in the presence of such a person, one behaves differently. One listens more intently, chooses words carefully, strives for punctuality, avoids making flimsy excuses. Why? Because one respects this person. In one's mind, they merit such consideration. Now ask a simple yet uncomfortable question. Why does one not act this way towards oneself? When a commitment is solely to oneself, punctuality often vanishes, discipline dissolves, and excuses gain more weight than a promise made. One delays one's own plans, breaks promises made to oneself, and cancels internal commitments without remorse. With others, respect. With oneself, negligence. This is the root of many silent failures. Self-respect is the bedrock of discipline. If one does not respect oneself, one will perpetually seek external validation, supervision, or motivation. To live this way is to live in dependence, while one, with oneself, negligence. This is the root of many silent failures. Self-respect is the bedrock of discipline. If one does not respect oneself, one will perpetually seek external validation, supervision, or motivation. To live this way is to live in dependence, because as long as one is dependent on external forces to drive one's actions, one is not truly free. The text was truncated here, but the core message is clear. The importance of self-respect as the foundation for discipline and self-mastery. Without it, one is constantly seeking external validation and motivation rather than being driven by internal conviction.